Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the David and Jonathan narrative as found in 1 Samuel chapter 20. Back in chapter 16, we saw David being given God's Spirit in contrast to Saul, from whom God's Spirit departs. And he is given an evil spirit in chapter 17. That was the David and Goliath story. David faces Goliath in faith. He has victory. And Saul, by contrast, is seen in fear of Goliath. In chapter 18, we see David being loved by others, by Jonathan, by Michal, even those of Saul's family. In Saul's case, he tries to murder David and to have him killed, and now that only grows. As we come now to chapter 19, we're going to see Jonathan interceding for David in order to try to restore him. Meanwhile, an evil spirit comes on Saul again, and he tries to murder David again. Saul sends people to go and murder David there in chapter 9, and Michal hides David and helps him to escape. And finally, at the end of the story, David finds refuge with Samuel. As we come now to chapter 20 and verse 1, then David fled from Naoth in Ramah. Remember, Naoth was probably it's like the prophet's place in Ramah, and came and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity? And what is my sin before your father that he is seeking my life?" David is looking for an intercessor, and he finds it in Jonathan. He said to him, that is Jonathan speaking, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. So why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." And he seems to be, Jonathan seems to be unaware of his father's intentions, even though his father had made those intentions plain earlier. But then Jonathan had interceded, and as far as he knows, everything now is okay. Verse 3, "Yet David vowed again, saying, Your father knows well that I have found favor in your sight. And he has said, Do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is hardly a step between me and death." David realizes it, even if Jonathan does not. Well, Jonathan's reaction, verse 4, "Then Jonathan said to David, Whatever you say, I will do for you." So he's willing, even though he's not himself convinced, he's willing to do what is necessary on behalf of David. Verse 5, "So David said to Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I ought to sit down to eat with the king, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field." Now, when you hear the field, don't think, like a farmland thing. Maybe a better translation there would be the wild. I think that's more the idea. In other words, not in the cultivated area. "I'll hide myself in the wild until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, because it is the yearly sacrifice there for the whole family." Remember how that David's anointing had been sort of under the cover of a sacrifice, and so he's using that cover story again here. Notice also the third evening. I can't help but wonder if there's some sort of way that we ought to look for Jesus when we see that third evening. Hold that thought. Verse 7, David's still talking. He says, "If it is good, your servant will be safe, but if he is very angry, know that he has decided on evil. Therefore, deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord." David is reminding Jonathan of the covenant into which they have both entered. "But if there is iniquity in me, put me to death yourself, for why should then you bring me to your father? If I've done wrong, then treat me as one doing wrong," David says, "because you've brought me into a covenant of the Lord." Berit Adonai, a covenant with God. This isn't just between two people. They have brought God into the covenant. Verse 9, Jonathan said, "Far be it from you, for if I should indeed learn that evil has been decided by my father to come upon you, then would I not tell you about it?" Jonathan is protesting both his ignorance of any situation, but also of his willingness to be right, no matter what his family says. Verse 10, "Then David said to Jonathan, Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? How am I going to know? After all, it's possible for you to come and try to tell me and then follow you out to where I am, and then I would be betrayed. Jonathan comes up with a plan. Verse 11, Jonathan said to David, come and let us go out into the field. Remember, we're treating that as the wild. So they both of them went out to the wild. Then Jonathan said to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or maybe the third day, behold, if there is good feeling toward David, shall I not then send to you and make it known to you? If there's no problem, I'll let you know. Verse 13, if it please my father to do you harm, may the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also if I do not make it known to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. In other words, if there's danger, then may that danger fall upon me rather than me betray you. And may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Verse 14, if I am still alive, will you not show me the loving kindness of the Lord that I may not die? Can we keep this covenant past whatever happens to my father? Verse 15, you shall not cut off your loving kindness from my house forever, not even when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. That's actually sort of prophetic, because we're going to see the enemies of David cut off. But Jonathan is saying, don't cut me off when that happens, because I have connected myself to you. Verse 16, so Jonathan, and there's that language, made a covenant, but the word covenant, notice, is in italics. It's not there in the Hebrew because it doesn't need to be there in the Hebrew. So John cut with the house of David, and covenant is understood. He cut a covenant, saying, may the Lord require it at the hands of David's enemies. And Jonathan made David vow again because of his love for him, because he loved him as he loved his own life. So again, he cuts a covenant. You don't need the word covenant. It's just the word for yakrat, Yonathon. Jonathan cut with him. Verse 18, then Jonathan said to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. When you have stayed for 3 days, there's the 3 days again, you shall go down quickly and come to the place where you hid yourself on that evening, on that eventful day, and you shall remain by the stone is I will shoot 3 arrows to the side as though I shot at a target, and behold, I will send the lad, I'm going to bring somebody with me, saying, go find the arrows, and if I specifically say to the lad, behold, the arrows are on this side of you, get them, then come. That's a message for you to hear too, for their safety, and no harm as the Lord lives. But if I say to the youth, behold, the arrows are beyond you, then the situation is beyond me too. Go, for the Lord has sent you away. As for the agreement of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. That covenant stands whatever takes place. Verse 24, so David hid in the field, remember the wild, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food, and the king sat on his seat as usual, in the seat by the wall, and then Jonathan rose up, and Abner sat down by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not speak anything that day, for he thought, maybe it's an accident, he's not clean, he has to go through some sort of ritual purification. Surely he's not clean, I'm sure that's the reason. Verse 27, it came about the next day, the second day of the new moon, that David's place was empty. So Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has the son of Jesse not come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan then answered, he answers his father Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He's using the cover story, for he said, please let me go, since our family has a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to attend. And now if I found favor in your sight, please let me get away, that I may see my brothers. For this reason he's not come to the king's table. That's the cover story, and Jonathan's sticking to it. Verse 30, then Saul's anger burned against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. Do I not know that you are choosing the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? This is a strong, stinging rebuke. Verse 31, for as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Therefore now send and bring him to me, for he must surely die. Saul is beyond acting out anything. He's speaking his mind, and he is speaking it clearly. So Saul's question had been, where is David? Jonathan's response, the cover story, that he's visiting family, and Saul's anger now has come out, and he clearly says David must die. Verse 32, but Jonathan answered Saul, his father, and said to him, why should he be put to death? What has he done? Then Saul hurled a spear at him to strike him down. What Saul tried to do to David, he now tries to do in his anger to his own son. And so Jonathan knew that his father decided to put David to death. There's no covering it up now. Verse 34, then Jonathan arose from this table in fierce anger. Now it's Jonathan who's angry, and did not eat food on the second day of the new moon, for he was grieved over David because his father had dishonored him. Notice it's an issue of honor. And so we had Saul's question, where's David? And the response, he's visiting family, and then Saul's anger. But now Jonathan's question, well, what did David do? And Saul's response had been to throw a spear at him. And now it's Jonathan's anger at the injustice, but at the dishonor that is taking place. Verse 35, now it came about in the morning. Now we saw the first day and the second day, so this is the morning after the second day, which makes this the third day. It came about in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field, remember, the wild, for the appointment with David, and a little lad he said to his lad, run, find now the arrows which I'm about to shoot. And as the lad was running, he shot an arrow past the appointed sign. When the lad reached the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the lad and said, is not the arrow beyond you? That's the sign. It's over our head. Verse 38, and Jonathan called after the lad, hurry, be quick, do not stay. And Jonathan's lad picked up the arrow and came to his master. But the lad was not aware of anything. Only Jonathan and David knew about the matter. When Jonathan gave his weapons to his lad and said to him, then he gave them to his lad and said to him, go bring them to the city. I think Jonathan had set this up in case there was anyone else following. He knew he would not have control over that, and so he has set this up. But now when the lad was gone, David rose from the south side and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept together, but David the more. David is truly broken up because he is losing his friend and his kingdom and his king, and now he will go out and be a wanderer. Verse 42, Jonathan said to David, go in safety, inasmuch as we have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord will be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever. Then he rose and departed, while Jonathan went into the city. They depart not to see each other again in this life. Now, in this story, I think we've seen, or maybe hinted at, some parallels. You see, Jonathan met David on the third day after David had been hidden. And in the case of Jesus, he was hidden and rose from the dead on the third day. In Jonathan's case, he interceded on behalf of David, and Jesus, too, intercedes for us. He makes intercession for us. Jonathan's received Saul's anger. Saul's anger was directed at him as he interceded. The anger of his father was directed at him. And likewise, Jesus took the wrath, the anger of God upon himself on our behalf. He received the curse. He remember what he cried out on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? In Jonathan's case, he made a covenant with David. In Jesus' case, he has made a covenant with us, a covenant into which we have entered. And indeed, there's coming a day when we're going to see his face, but in the interim, we are separated, looking for that final day of reunion.